Hi everyone, welcome back to Butterfly and the Equality Justice Alliance mental health video series, and this is the final episode in the series. And today we're here with Mr. Rene Holder-McClean-Ramirez,
Hi.
and Rene is a advocate. He works with the community. He's been engaged in community work for how many years?
10 plus years.
Yes, a while. So
A few years, maybe.
very young, but very new, still very fresh. And Renee is gonna be giving his view, his perspective, his knowledge on his work with the community and all the things that can go wrong, that can go right with, and everything about mental health as it relates to Barbados and some bits on the Eastern Caribbean. So welcome, Renee, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, give us a bit on your background in activism as it relates specifically to LGBT and the mental health, or in general.
Well, I actually started activism work in Barbados, advocacy work in Barbados, working through the Caribbean HIV/AIDS Alliance, and I believe that was in 2013. The years are a little bit, you know. Back then, we were looking at behavioral change, and this was a USAID funded project. And we had we had outreach workers that were called animators, and we would go into communities, discuss sexual health, and kind of just keep in touch with those community members to see how they've been developing in their sexual practices and behaviors of things that we taught them. Even back then in 2013, we started to recognize that the interaction community had to be more than just saying, hi, how are you doing? Here are some condoms, and mentioning where they can go to get STI checks. And one of the key things that we came across was that the struggles of the community were not being serviced enough when it came to psychosocial care. And the access to psychosocial care was one that was kind of hard for persons to access, especially in the public health system. And since then, we have been trying to work to improve that ability for community members to have that sort of access to psychosocial care.
Yeah, because the psychosocial component in Barbados is very lacking. There have been a few advances, but it's still leaps and bounds not where it could be.
Some of the struggles that I personally have come across, one would have been like if the Ministry of Health, they would usually have persons in place, especially in the HIV program, but often those persons would be there for only a limited time.
Mm-hmm.
Places like BFPA also had a psychologist as well, but that psychologist usually was there during short periods, and as well, there wasn't enough finance in the budget to keep someone for a longer period.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, there is a stigma around accessing the Black Rock Polyclinic for a lot of people.
Yes, and we've spoken about this in other videos.
But outside of that, a lot of people, I don't think, know that there is usually a counselor or a person attached from from the Black Rock Psychiatric at the local polyclinics. And again, this is something that I spoke to at one point to the Black Rock Polyclinic about, and I don't think they might have a person in place, but I don't think larger community is aware that there's usually outpost persons that are located at local polyclinics, and how effective that has been, I am not sure, but it's something that for persons that want to seek social care, psychosocial care, that's another option is if they feel fearful of going straight to Black Rock Polyclinic. But the other alternatives are usually paid services, and when you're talking about the LGBT community, especially persons that are at high risk, sometimes they don't have the income or the money to access paid psychosocial care, and usually with the type of funding that LGBT programs have, there's not a component to help assist in that as well. So it has been something that we have not done that, that it needs more, for us to do when it comes to psychosocial care for sure.
There's always the LGBT community organizations, or I guess private donors that can contribute to help where it comes to funding community members to get these services. But again, it's kind of tricky, it's kind of hit and miss. And I find that usually LGBT persons negate the fact that they experience mental health challenges, and they find maybe not so good ways to function if their challenges are ignored completely.
Yeah, so not even just LGBT, I think community on the whole, actually, we are, as a Caribbean people, you're just told to carry on or get on with it, be strong,
Yeah.
pull through.
Or get over it.
Or get over it. As you just mentioned, actually, there are one or two LGBT organizations or organizations that do with marginalized groups that do have small amount of funding that helps with psychosocial care. There are two that in my head come to mind. One will be Equals, and another organization that helps marginalized groups would be Seed. But again, capacity-wise, they only can see so many persons. I think in both cases, their psychosocial care person, be a psychiatrist, a counselor, they are voluntary and receive a small stipend. So this is not somebody that's there 24/7.
And then the capacity is limited because they don't want to overwhelm the person that is
exactly.
coming.
It's usually just one volunteer person, and say for instance, if capacity is that they can only deal with 13 to 16 clients, there is a wait list probably just as long or longer.
Yeah.
And the reality is, persons in the LGBT community, from the outreach work that I have done, they're suffering from depression. There's gender-based violence happening in the community. These are persons that may have grown up with issues in the home, issues in the school. There are issues of actually self-realization and coming out, and a lot to navigate outside of just being LGBT as well. So having that outlet to actually take that all that stuff that's happening and actually being able to deal with it and sort through it is something that often they can't do, or they don't have the tools or the skills or the help to do it. And this is where you see then dysfunction and acting out happening, and or in some cases self-medicating, and self-medicating can take many forms. It could be as simple as just persons popping Xanax or other proper medication to different types of abuses, or sometimes even self-harm. There's high levels of persons in the community that do cutting and
that's something
things
that we don't usually talk about or think about. Is usually seen or portrayed on TV with people cutting their wrists and sitting in a bathtub, and the negative portrayal of mental health challenges in media sometimes is very disheartening. But again, I find there are persons who we've come across that cut or take their grandmother's pills because there's an abundance because she's old and whatever. And we don't usually talk about those things or even try to, I guess, understand. It's a bit dodgy when you realize somebody comes to the space seeking help. You can't exactly help them because the wait list is so long, but you can see that this person should be prioritized.
Yeah, and that's the next thing too. A referral system needs to be set up, and even though they have been attempts to have a referral system to counselors available around the island,
it's never been.
Yeah. Yes. Well, we've worked together, so we know the challenges of actually trying to get these type of referral systems set up and being able to see an emergency case and get that person into care as quickly as possible. And even as community outreach workers, even figuring out how, which I personally know, like maybe how to access and get a person into care in C4, but most persons, well, in QEH system.
Yeah, but the QEH also has its
limits and space.
Yes.
Yes. Um, so it has had its challenges in trying to get persons to the right type of care that is needed, but we have seen I started stuff like cutting and self care or self medication,
Self harm.
self harm, right? Um, when it comes to care, also too, one something that I haven't really seen done here for LGBT community is actually really strong peer groups. Because sometimes that's another way to help persons if you're not able to sometimes access maybe one-on-one care, is having actually peer groups.
Group therapy.
And that can do, it's part of the whole when you're overlooking when you're looking at therapy on the whole, but it's not something that is seen practice here in its what could be its full capacity as yet. Being able to sit down with a like group and talk about your experience and work through your experiences, and also again being given tools to how to properly deal with the situations that you're experiencing and going through at that time.
Right. So I think group therapy is something that definitely needs to be explored more. However, I find because of small little micro fractions, groups,
There's always different personalities in a group.
yes, so there's always friction, and again, some persons may want it to be confidential, but you can't be allotted the space of confidentiality because there are other persons that are experiencing the same or similar things. Where, like you said, group therapy would be more effective. It won't tackle everyone specifically, but then it would help the general population.
Yeah, group, as I said, everything has its place. So one of the things I've always had, like in group therapy, there's certain rules. There's always like everything is discussed here is confidential. But again, as a person going into the group therapy, you have to always be, aware that you are with several different people, and people can or may not hold all the rules for this group all the time. So you share what you need to share how you want to share, and be okay with what you share. There's no force to have to do something or say something or say what you don't want to say. But it's still a helpful tool. And if as a group you start to work together and you feel comfortable, then and it works for you, perfectly fine. If it's not something that works for you, then there are other alternatives.
Right. So while we're on this topic, like, how do you find functioning with mental health challenges is done? Like, community members, do they function well on their own? Um, do they even acknowledge that they have challenges to want to?
Right. So, in reality, anyone that's going through mental health challenge at some point may feel that they're functioning well on their own, but if it's not dealt with, eventually it will build and implode into a situation. Um, I again thinking just not just as community members, but as caring people, we don't sometimes realize the value of seeking mental health care. So situations build, and the acting out is usually the result of the build, and we deal with the acting out, but we don't deal with the underlying issues, and we see that too often in our communities, and people can go for years without any actual help with what are the underlying issues and what are causing these mental breaks. I can talk about that from both work experience and personal experience as well, because in the advocacy work role, it is taking in a lot of information. It's very taxing. It's stressful, and it becomes overwhelming.
It
and
does.
Many times, persons that are colleagues, including myself, have breaks of, all right, this is just too much, and I can't live with it. So, actually, a good practice for counselors and psychiatrists and psychologists is actually to debrief with other professionals so that they don't carry all the weight of what they're learning from their clients. And that's something that we as workers in community as well don't do. we don't debrief and release all of that
Yeah.
work build up that we encounter with our clients. Because outreach work and self and advocacy work, you are hearing about so many different things are happening to community members, and it is um, a lot to take on when you're taking on persons being evicted from home, persons talking about situations of abuse, persons being challenged with health issues, and you're trying to find solutions for them. At the same time, you yourself are trying to survive within the same environment that they're in. So it's one of those things that we across the board have to do better at. We've been trying to do better at, but again, for me personally, it's something that there are big gaps of how do we access and how do we maintain a healthier actually LGBT community in the work that we do, and also too for our clients in coming into the spaces where we're telling them to come, it's safe and whatever. How do we improve that health wise as well for them, and for them to be able to speak out and talk about their real issues and real problems.
Wow. Like I said, funders, anyone can donate to the organization. We can leave information for each organization in Barbados and other Caribbean countries, St. Lucia, Grenada. The list goes on, and we can leave information for those organizations where you can donate to help the community, heterosexual, LGBT, just to get better help with mental health access and cure around the Caribbean. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
And also, just want to add quickly,
mm-hmm.
I think when it comes to some of the other Caribbean islands as well, it is also to number of professionals.
Yes.
It's a limited number of professionals that you can access. And again, for any client as well, we need to feel comfortable with these persons providing services. So, for instance, somebody will say, "Oh, go and talk to your pastor or church counselor," and if you're as an LGBT person, you're not comfortable with that, even though that person is quite capable and there'd be no issue maybe around it. Um, if you're not comfortable, you're not going to go, and you're going to never really give it a full and proper go.
So, when it comes to mental health challenges, and we spoke about this on the previous episode, how mental health issues and mandatory court restrictions to the psychiatric hospital, and where the gaps in legislation don't help persons who truly have mental health issues.
Well, when persons are court are appointed to the psychiatric hospital, that's a whole different situation. And again, that's usually someone acting out, and then they have to have the evaluation done. And the court is just basically, or more times than not, going to be waiting for a report from the psychiatric hospital, and then another decision is made. And I am not going to say that a person cannot get the type of care that they need in that time at the psychiatric hospital, because I've met one or two people that said, being put in a psychiatric hospital is what saved them. But are we just dealing with a short term situation and just getting that person back into a balance level? Then we have to start talking about what happens then with continued care of that person once they either leave the court system, or they then spend the week or 2 weeks at the psychiatric hospital and then let out. Are they maintaining regular visits? Are they on medication? These are the sort of things. The follow up is what is important, and sometimes that is where the ball is dropped. It's, yes, we've got you to a level where we're going to deal with the situation because it has escalated, but then after you're back in society, what's happening with the follow up? How is that follow up look? Are there any restrictions that you have to go to counseling and you have to report to the psychiatric? And even when that is done, if it's a court appointed situation, what then is the onus on you to keep that? Because a lot of times and this is with anybody sometimes going through mental situations, once they feel fine,
that's the end of it.
Yeah, they think, well, They don't need to continue going to doctor, and they don't need to continue taking medication. And in reality, I think even with families, they think, oh well, it's just like going to a doctor and you get fixed. Mental health is sometimes a continuous care, and it's not something that is fixed per se. It's managed or handled, and what often this is where we, even as maybe even persons going through the issues, don't understand that it's something that has to be continuously managed and continuously worked on and continuously, it has ups and downs, and you need to be able to say when you're in a down that you need help, but also to when you're on an up, to maintain that is not saying I feel great and I need not to take anything, you know. So the court system appointee, usually as far as I know, is when somebody has done something that has brought them to court, and then the court has decided, all right, we need to, the prison situation is not really what's happening with you or for you, but this time maybe here that can resolve why you're acting out, because again it is acting out that that person is really doing, not necessarily causing a disturbance or whatever. They're acting out because they haven't dealt with their underlying mental issues.
Do you think that there should be an allotted time to for the court to let the person have the evaluation and receive the findings of the assessment to then make a decision? Do you think legislation is really good when it comes to mental health?
I again, you see, the court system also has its own
Flaws,
but also to it is
huge
burdened.
cracks.
It's burdened with a lot of things, and again, they're dependent on what the professionals at the psychiatric hospital are saying to them in this report and their evaluation, and then another thing is playing into there of what necessarily did the person do, because if the person did something that was criminal, then the court still has to deal with that as well. So this is a bigger situation that takes two different departments. One is a health issue, plus then it's still a police, judicial, legal issue that's going on, and determining what is the best outcome for that person is a combination. But at the end of the day, if they did do something that was illegal in society's eyes, they still have to deal with that as well. So that's a harder question to answer if legislation just with time will solve it, because in the psychiatric hospital there is a section to deal with prisoners that have mental issues. So they are where they'll be serving dual time plus getting psychiatric help while there. But again, it depends on the level of what is the mental state of that person and what can be done in that time that they're serving, just as time as well as their time in the psychiatric hospital.
So, well, this is the final question. So, how do you think, um, or what would you recommend for persons struggling with mental health and navigating day-to-day life, work, relationships?
First thing, whenever you're going through a situation, is to actually ask for help or seek help. It's actually important to, if you do have persons that you can turn to and say like, these are your regular persons, to say like, I at this point need help. Depending on your setup or your family situation or your relationship situation, let those people know like, if you see certain behaviors, then I'm giving you beforehand permission to step in and take me to get help, because certain situations personals will never on their own go and seek help, because that's part of also to what acting out and playing out can be. Um, so the major thing is to find those trusted persons, be able to ask for help, because nothing else is going to happen till you make that step. But also too, as family members, note that persons will, are not always going to come to you and ask for help.
Yeah. And again, because of the stigma associated with
Yeah,
mental
you're
health.
you're just not ready. You're not able to, and so it is important for loved ones of persons that suffer from mental health to recognize their usual cycles and changes. Because if you're around a person all the time, or they're part of your life, you're gonna just note those changes, and you can track those changes. You can see when that shift is happening, and this person is going into a down, or acting out, or not keeping their regular routine when they're in a healthy state of mind. And that's when you can either say to them, do something's going on, let's go and seek help, or you just monitor till they're ready, because sometimes trying to control a person only helps them to spiral faster or further, and pushes them away. So you just have to keep your door open in a way to let so that they know that when they're ready, they can come to you. But one of the mistakes I think we make is try to control persons. And when you try to control them is when you're going to push them further away. You still have to deal with them, like, in a way of, in a respectful way, and in a way too that it doesn't alienate them, and make them run. It's really hard. And I also think it's important for persons that are family or relatives are connected to the person with mental health, for themselves to seek some sort of counseling to how they deal with it, because it affects them too. Yeah.
Wow, Rene, thank you so much.
Welcome.
So, yes, that was the conclusion of the series. Again, this was with Butterfly and Equality Justice Alliance, and we're going to keep advocating for mental health in Barbados and around the Caribbean. So, look out for that. And all mental health providers, family members, and persons experiencing mental health challenges, please, please, please be kind, be respectful, be human, and try to help as much as you can.